for me, you know, I just then asked them how it was. And of course, it pissed me off the first time they said, well, actually it wasn't good, you have to do it again. But that's how filmmaking should be.
Hey Siri, Mattes Anruf. Sag dem Fahrer, der soll mich im Loch an der Ecke abholen. Moin, moin.
Na, Meister, wieder auf Weltreise?
Ich habe ein Casting, ganz schön dickes Ding.
So I wanted someone who represents something in particular, a man who is, you know, is very self-conscious, full of himself, successful, benefiting from modern times and this, you know, life that we are living these days. Someone who fits into that, you know, image, and someone who exposes himself and creates that, you know, supposedly perfect facade. At the very beginning, when the idea was born, I was actually also thinking of other professions. I was thinking of a politician maybe, or an architect, and but then I thought, I don't know nothing about these worlds. Why not an actor? And when I thought about this, I thought, why not me? To then deliberately play that game that you just mentioned. So adding a lot of, you know, personal experiences and professional experiences, humiliations that I experienced, but in fact portraying a man who has lost himself to that, who has lost himself to his profession, to his fame that he thinks he has, and someone who is not interested in his environment, you know, not even in his family, you know, he's just concerned about himself. And so the film is about looking outside, how much do we know about our neighbors, but also looking inside, and what is behind that supposedly perfect facade. Very often there's a lot of solitude and emptiness. No? Yeah. No, it is still the case. Yeah, I've been living in Berlin for 22 years, and in a house with neighbors from the east. Who knows if they would still live there in 5 years from now? So the film is also like I always saw it like an observation of the status quo as I see Berlin these days, and having, you know, seen the changes in the city. Two men living in the same house, but in fact in two different worlds. And it is by talking to my neighbors, for example, or other people from the East, that I experienced a deep frustration and sometimes anger and sadness that, you know, they feel, you know, betrayed by the politics, by the system. So false promises were made back in the days, and promising that these two countries would become one and the same and leveled. But the fact is that the West overtook the East, you know, and many people then didn't find their place in that new world, in this new Germany. They had something different in mind with their lives, and it did not happen. And some of them, as you also said, told me about a different kind of solidarity they experienced in their past, you know. Even say it was better back then because they had a safe job, you know. They you know, there was more safety, you know. Also now in times of, you know, a global crisis, also the local conflicts rise again everywhere, you know. There's a lot of poison in the society, and so all these differences come back, especially now, and I'm speaking of right now, for example, with the COVID crisis. You can also see, you know, the big changes, the cultural, social, political differences that we have, that are massive, you know. So, and in Berlin it's fading a little bit, you know, among the younger generations, of course, because it's a big international and cosmopolitan city. So these bars that I'm showing in the film, for example, slowly disappear, you know. But as soon as you leave Berlin and you go to the province, I realize and see immediately how different this part of Germany still is in comparison to where I grew up. What was driving me with this story was mainly that subject matter gentrification. This is something that has been part of my life since I moved away from Cologne. So no matter where I went, I always thought like I'm one of them, you know. I'm one of them, you know, who just invades, is part of that process without feeling guilty, but being aware of a certain incoherence. And still up until now, you know, after 22 years, I cannot say ich bin ein Berliner like Kennedy, but ich bin ein Kölner. So, yeah. She's, I've always admired her for her multi-talent, and she can even write, she directs, she acts, she sometimes even composes the music, no, for her films. And also I found it interesting that she acts in her films, that once that I had the idea to do that myself, being aware of the dangers that can mean, you know, that double function, it always gave me comfort to see how she works, you know, split herself in two. And it worked. I think it was her who told me, you know, a good director is also someone who casts well, not only the actors, but the crew. So for me, it was very important to delegate, to be very open about communicating what I don't know and what I have to learn, and to be able to delegate to people who are experts in their various fields. So the set design, for instance, I wanted someone from the East, and Susanne Hopf, who did many films with Andreas Dresen, who's a famous director from the East. I just knew she would design the bar, knowing exactly in every detail how it should look like, how it should feel like, you know. And so it was with all the other heads of department. The DOP, the director of photography, and the assistant director were, for example, my directors for my acting, because that was also something that was very important to me, to not judge my own acting. I could judge my partner, and he was so brilliant that it only meant fine-tuning, you know. We had a long rehearsal process where we, you know, worked it out like a theater play. And so that was fine. Also, it didn't happen, that was my fear, that while I was acting with him, I would then, in the moment, already, you know, judge him as a director and have that. But it never happened, because he's so good that he made me forget that I was directing. And because the dialogue was so well written, that it didn't lose its energy, you know. It had this, you know, this punch and this drive that was really perfect. So that was fine. And for me, you know, I just then asked them how it was. And of course, it pissed me off the first time they said, well, actually it wasn't good, you have to do it again. But that's how filmmaking should be. That's how I experienced it with the great directors I was allowed to work with, that it's a real collaboration. It's not, you know, I didn't like working with dictators, with captains on a ship who bark at their crew and command everything. So yes, at the end of the day, it's you who has to take the decisions. But it's such a joy if you're surrounded by great, wonderful people, talented people who do the best each in their, you know, profession to, you know, for the final result. For now, this well, I did I played a little part in Kingsman. So by the end of next week, I'll have to go to London to do. And this is a monster of a movie, so there's be a lot of talking. I joined a production company, and we finished this year our most ambitious project, which is All Quiet on the Western Front. You know, it's like the first time that we did it in German, which is incredible because you know, the most read book in German book in history, and has been done in 1930. As a film in you know, in English, and won the Oscar, and then another time in the 80s, but never in German. So, and next year, who knows? There's a couple of things that are up in the air, but because of COVID nowadays, it was always unpredictable, but now even more so.